I'm Chef Julia Dunaway, and I make whole food, plant-based dishes that I think taste really good, and I hope you do too. And today I'm making something really simple. Everything doesn't have to be complicated, but this is just a simple brown rice and lentil dish. I made a similar dish in my Middle Eastern class called mujadra, but I've also seen a similar dish called kosheri in an Egyptian restaurant. So I'm sure this is one of those international dishes that can be made with any number of different spices, and I'm just spicing it up today with things I like. So I'm just going to call it brown rice and lentils, and I'm using just everyday brown lentils. I get these from Bob's Red Mill, and then I order brown rice from Massa Organics in California. So those are the things I'm using. And this dish was a little tricky when I first started trying to put it together because all the other dishes similar to this use white rice, and so they cook a lot faster. So in order to get this going, we have to get our brown rice cooking. So I've measured out a cup, rinsed it, and drained it, and I'm putting it in this pan of boiling vegetable stock. You can use water. I'm using vegetable stock just because I think that makes it taste better. And it's a vegetable stock I bought at the grocery store. It's not one that I made. But I like the taste of the one that I get at the grocery store, and when I have time, I make my own. But, you know, it can be a little time consuming. I'm going to bring it back to a boil, reduce it to simmer, and then cook it for 25 minutes. But in the meantime, what I learned in combining brown rice and lentils was there was a certain way I had to cook it to get it to come out perfect, where the lentils are cooked and the brown rice is cooked. When I tried using the instructions for white rice, the white rice would be overcooked and the lentils would be undercooked. So even though this seems really simple, a lot of trial and error went into perfecting this. And I'm going to use my skillet to caramelize a whole onion. This is a big onion, but we're going to use all of it. And I'm going to be using the whole time that my rice is cooking to just cook this onion and a couple cloves of garlic so that it becomes nice and kind of a light brown and very soft and very well cooked. And it's going to be both an ingredient that goes into the brown rice and lentils, but it's also going to be used as kind of a topping for the dish. So let's see. Rice is a little slow to come to a boil. I'm going to take my onion and cut it into a dice and get that in there quickly in my skillet. I've got my skillet heating up on medium-high heat, so remember, we don't want to cook our vegetables in a cold pan because if you get them in a hot pan, they'll immediately start to sizzle and brown, and that's where you start creating some good flavor. So if you hear your pan, you should hear it sizzle as soon as you drop it in there. And then you should also not drop half your onions on the counter while you're trying to get them in the pan. And I'm going to do the same thing with this other half. Make a couple horizontal cuts, and then some vertical ones. And hurry up and get it in the pan. I like to use yellow onions. Some people like white onions. And in Texas, we have these really nice, they're kind of like sweet yellow onions, and they taste really good. I've seen other people use red onions, white onions, and the more traditional, not sweet yellow onions. So use whatever you like, but I think you won't go wrong if you can get some of these sweet yellow onions. Okay, so we got those going, and you see over here my rice is boiling. So I'm going to reduce it to a simmer and get the lid on it. And I'm going to set my timer for 25 minutes. And since it's brown rice takes a while to cook. You can't really rush it. So that brown rice is going to take 25 minutes, plus it's going to take another 20 minutes once we get the lentils in there. So the whole trick here is we give the rice a little bit of a head start, and then we add our lentils, because the lentils only take 20 minutes, and we don't want to cook it all together because by the time the brown rice is done, the lentils will have turned into, you know, kind of like a mush, which doesn't taste good ever. So that's why we have to time this very well. Well, while we're cooking the rice, it gives us time to cook our vegetables, our onions and garlic. So I'm just going to slice this garlic and then mince it and get it in with the onions. And don't be afraid to really cook onions a long time to get the reduced caramelized onions. You don't need any oil. The hot pan is plenty, and it'll work out just fine. And we're just going to chop this small. When I had the dish the first time, a friend of mine made it for me at a dinner that she invited me to, and hers was the Egyptian version, and it had pasta in it. So it had lentils, rice, and some little pieces of broken spaghetti noodles. And it was really good. I loved it. But when she gave me the recipe for it, it started with 2 tablespoons of olive oil, of course, because most people cook with oil, but I don't. I cook whole food plant-based, no oil. So her version, while it was really delicious, it was also a lot richer than the one I make. So I figured out that we can make it without the oil. We can just cook these onions down. And then once the onions are caramelized, and it takes that full 25 minutes, I'm going to let them saute until they're lightly brown. And I'll show you here in just a second. Once they turn light brown, I'm going to cover them and let them cook for a few minutes covered, and that softens them. Then I'll uncover them and just let them continue cooking. And then once they're cooked, I'll start adding some things to them. And this whole process is going on while the rice is cooking. And when the rice is done, we'll just add these to the rice along with the lentils. So you can probably tell they're starting to turn light brown. We'll just give it another minute. And in the meantime, my spices and all my other ingredients are ready to go. I'll turn my pan up a little bit. And don't be afraid to turn your pan up. I noticed one thing with the people cooking whole food plant-based, no oil a lot of times, is they're afraid to cook on high heat. And so somebody has told them that you have to have, your pan has to have water in it to start cooking. And then they have it on low heat and they put a bunch of vegetables in it and they overcrowd their pan, and the vegetables just steam and nothing happens to them. They don't taste very good. I'm going to be using some other ingredients. I'm going to put a tomato in later as we'll get it ready. I've got cayenne pepper, chili powder, coriander, paprika. You saw the garlic. I've got some salt. I've got cumin powder. So this is going to have a lot of different complex spices in it, and I think it's going to have a really good taste. It's not Asian. For once, I'm not making something that is Asian. It really isn't anything. It's just what I feel like putting in it. But, in my Middle Eastern version, I had some things in it like cinnamon and mint for garnish, and it had a pinch of cloves. So it had kind of the Middle Eastern flavor profile, but this one is not going to. So you can see now the onions are starting to lightly brown. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water so they don't dry out completely. And I'm going to cover my skillet for about 5 minutes. And then when I come back, they'll be at a point where they're caramelized and we're ready to add the spices and tomato and ready to incorporate the lentils into the rice. So we'll be back in a few minutes to get to the rest of this dish. Okay, so the onions are done caramelizing, and you can see how they've kind of reduced, and they're a lot smaller, and they're a nice brown color. So I'm going to take out about a cup to use as a topping for the lentils and rice later. But remember what I said, now we have to add some spices and other things to our onion mixture. I don't need to turn my heat off. So I have just an assortment of different spices. I have some chili powder, just your typical medium chili powder, half a teaspoon of coriander, about half a teaspoon of paprika, half a teaspoon of coriander. Did I say coriander? No, cumin. That was cumin. A little cayenne pepper. Don't overdo it with the cayenne. It will burn the back of your throat, and everybody will say, oh, this is too spicy. Believe me, I've done that many times where I got carried away with hot peppers. And then everyone gets mad at me. I don't understand it because I like hot peppers. One of my toppings for this dish is habanero sauce. So anyway, I like spicy things. And then I'm going to put some fresh tomato in here. And that's kind of optional. You don't have to put tomato in this, but I think it adds a little something. I put tomatoes in my brown lentils that I use for lentil loaf, and that made them taste so good. So that's what made me think about this dish, was the lentil loaf recipe that I made more recently had some of these very same spices, and I thought I need to go back and make just the brown rice and lentil dish like I made the lentils for my lentil loaf. So that's kind of what inspired this. All right, so I've got my tomato. I'm just trying to cut it into little cubes. And this will cook down because we're going to put this back in the pot along with the brown lentils, and it's going to cook for 25 minutes. We started at 20, but check it. You can always cook it 5 more minutes, but say 20 minutes. All right, so I think I got this chopped up pretty well. Run the knife through it again. All right, so now I'm going to add this to the onions. Mix all that up. And then, if you remember, we have our rice mixture right here bubbling away. I'm going to add this onion mixture to the rice. And you can probably guess how this is really going to flavor it so nicely. Now, I left some of my spices are stuck here in my skillet, so I'm just going to take a tablespoon of water and sort of deglaze my pan and scrape up any of the spices that kind of stuck to my skillet. And this is a hex-clad set of pots that I got recently. I've heard that they're really good. And one of the things I like about them especially is you can use metal utensils on them and it doesn't destroy them like my Calphalon. Okay, and then here's my 1 cup of brown lentils that have been rinsed and drained. Always rinse your lentils because lentils can be dusty. I didn't know that when I first started using them. And one time I cooked something and it had kind of a funny taste, and I think it was like dust on the lentils. That wasn't very good. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this to a boil. And once it comes back to a boil, I'm going to put the lid on it and let it simmer for 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes, I'm going to check it. And if the lentils are still hard and there's not very much liquid, you can always add a little bit more. We're talking like 1/4 of a cup of liquid, and then cook it another 5 to 10 minutes. But just one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to overcook the lentils until they're so soft they just fall apart. You want them to still have some firmness to them, but you don't want them to be hard. They're not supposed to be al dente like hard spaghetti. So there's a fine line between the lentils being done, underdone, and overdone. And the way you figure all this out is through trial and error. And that's how the timing that I've done for this dish has kind of been through experimenting. And this was the right amount of time. So now it's come back to a boil. I'm going to cover it, reduce it to a simmer. And when we come back, it will be done. We'll garnish it and enjoy it. Okay, so our 20 minutes, give or take, I think I might have added a minute or 2, is over, and here we go. It is finished. So now all we have to do to serve it is pile it on our plate. And I like it because it's not overdone, but it's not underdone. It's just the right balance. The rice is done, the lentils are done. And I've got it next to some cooked greens. So I've taken some super greens and blanched them for 30 seconds and then put them in ice water. And then they kind of cook down to a small pile. I like to serve greens with my food. And then remember, we had the extra onions, oh, here they are, that were caramelized, so we have to put those on top. And you don't have to put them on top, but that's kind of the recipe. If you don't love caramelized onions, then don't worry about it. And then we'll put some parsley from the herb garden right outside on top of that. And then to make it even taste better, I like to put some freshly ground pepper and sea salt sparingly. And then, of course, I've got this is a habanero hot sauce from the monks at the Subiaco, Arizona Subiaco Abbey. I order it online and get a few bottles at a time. It's the best tasting habanero sauce, and they make a very limited amount, so it's kind of worth it if you can get yourself some, or use any hot sauce you like, anything that you enjoy eating. And then, you know, it's kind of hot, but it's a very good bite. It's healthy, but it tastes really good. It has, oh, I forgot about my tofu. The other thing you can add is, and this is not one of the recipes, but I'll add it to the recipes. I quickly made some tofu, and I'll just set it here on the side. And this is cumin, coriander, paprika tofu that I air fried just for like 10 minutes, and it's all nice and crunchy on the outside. And I think that makes a nice side to this dish, is just that little bit of crunchy, chewy tofu. So you don't have to make that, but I keep that tofu around all the time for other dishes, and it's just a nice supplement to my meal. So, you know, you don't have to make it, you can make it, but please try the brown rice and lentils. I think you'll really enjoy them. They keep well, they keep for several days in the fridge, like 4 or 5 days. They freeze well, and you can just eat them as a side dish or a main dish, take them with you somewhere, and they're just very satisfying. So I hope you make this. Subscribe to my channel, follow me on my website, chef-julie.com. I'm also on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. So thank you all for watching this, and see you soon. Bye-bye.